Welcome back to another episode of The Power of Your Story, a space for people to share their story, learn from their story, and ultimately empower others through that story. Before we get into today's theme and today's episode around this concept of how do you deal with other people's expectations, I wanted to just make a few quick announcements, and that is invite everyone who is a part of this show or has been a part of any of the previous episodes to a semi-related podcast called Overcoming Odds, and that is a weekly series or a weekly events that we're hosting on every single Friday at 10:45 a.m. Central Time, where we are exploring the topics of the connection between gratitude and grief, gratitude and resilience, gratitude and relationships. You get the point, many other topics within that, potential, purpose, and things like that. Two of the other co-hosts on that particular series are Casey Berman and Scott Mason, also previous guests on the show. So I just wanted to put that out there for anyone that is interested in joining us through LinkedIn Live or Facebook Live on Friday at 10:45 a.m. Central Time. Today's theme and today's topic. So for those that are tuning in right now, the special guest that I wanted to have on this show, he is a good connection of mine. Him and I met through, actually, I don't remember how we met. I think it was Joe Bogdan, who's also a guest on our show. And we just stayed in touch ever since. I've been on his podcast. He's been able to be on the different podcasts that I'm a part of. But just overall, a really great individual and someone that I respect and admire when it comes to the lived experience that he has had, but also the perspectives that he's able to add to all the conversations that him and I have. So I wanted to have this conversation with him to explore this topic of expectations. And in particular, how can the expectations from other people influence your own journey and trajectory in life? And with that said, let's please welcome him onto the show. There he is. All right. No expectations for this show.
I had the little countdown and everything going. I like it. I was like getting hyped up.
No, I appreciate you for being a part of this and the conversation that you and I were having prior to getting live and being able to share it with other people. I think this topic, for me, it fascinates me on a couple of different levels. I think it's a very real topic, as in something that I encounter, if I'm being honest, probably on a daily basis, from friends, family, and other people who are with or outside of my circle. And I'm looking forward to this conversation because I think there is a lot of wisdom and insight that I can gain from just being able to hear someone else's side to it. But I was sharing with you earlier, and maybe this is one of the ways that we can open up a dialogue around this. So I'm at an interesting age, and that is I'm 28 years old, and
So old.
I've experienced quite a few expectations from other people as far as when are you going to have kids, when are you going to start a family, when you're going to get into a relationship again, when you're going to buy a house, get the golden retriever. I do have a dog, so I supposedly have checked off one of those things. But when just this reality and perception of what I believe maybe is one version of what American dream looks like. Mm-hmm. And I found myself to be, whenever I'm part of those conversations, there's a lot of tension that I experience as far as that's just not the dream that I aspire for. And I've really gotten curious as far as how do you manage other people's expectations and how do you deal with them, especially if it's people who are closest to you. You know, because those relationships, like there's certain relationships, I don't know how you deal with this, but in the outside circle, that if paths no longer align, it's not as personal as if it's like a family member.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm curious, from your lens, how do you deal with that stuff? How do you deal, especially when it comes to let's start with family. How do you deal with expectations set by family members?
Oh, those are like often the hardest ones in my opinion. Because like you said, they're the ones that are closest to you. And more times than not, you hear about it the most from those family members.
Yeah.
Growing up, I'm sure my mom's not listening to this episode, so I'll throw it out. My mom, I love my mom. I love her more than just about anybody else walking the face of God's green earth. But Lord, she set some expectations on me growing up. It was, the males in my family went to, the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. So growing up, I had this expectation that I got to go to Carolina. And, my dad was a lawyer. He was in the military. So they're very successful, the men in my family. And the expectation was you're going to go to college for 4 years. You were going to get married, have, 3 beautiful children. You'll have a white picket fence. You'll have, two golden retrievers, and you'll have Christmas cards made every year and all this stuff. And that was the expectations. And then when I started getting into my 20s, and I was a while back, but I remember when I was in my 20s, it was, Tripp, you're getting older. You're 22. Why are you not married? When are you going to really get serious with this relationship? And when are you going to get serious about school and your job? And I mean, you're only getting older. You're 22 years old now. Yeah. And a lot of times those expectations were measured up to what other people's children are doing. And it was, well, this person's going to East Carolina, or this person's going to Wake Forest, or they're going to here. What is going on with you? What's wrong with you? Why are you not? They're in a relationship for 3 years. Why are you still single? And it was really hard to live up to those expectations. And really, they almost like held me back in a way, because I was like, well, I'm failing. I'm not a success. I'm not, meeting up to the expectations that my family is setting for me. And I like the quote by Brene Brown we were talking about before he came on, where expectations are resentment waiting to happen. Mm-hmm. And it was really tough coming from family. And I have now, being a loving father of 2 girls, I found myself being guilty as well. And, a good friend of mine, Dylan Roberts, who I got connected with not too long ago, he told me a story about his father would talk to him about his grades. And he would say, you got 4 A's, but what's going on with this 75? And just the expectation of you got to get all A's. But if you get all A's, it's all right. You met my expectations. You're good to go. I was so guilty of that with my own daughter, to where I would get Becton's, report card or progress report, and she would almost like not tell it to me. She's like, I'd have to get the email saying basically like progress reports are available. And I open it up and I'm like, okay, 96, 97, 94, 87. Sit down. Let's have a talk. What's going on with this 87? That is not what you need to be. She's still doing good. She's still being successful. And so, but it was just, I had this expectation of, you will have all A's, you will do this. And it's a lot to put on people. So I had to take a step back and realize the pressure that, my mother and siblings had put on me with my expectations. And I kind of had to put myself, back in my shoes when I was talking about my daughter. And I was like, I can't have that same amount of stress, pressure, anxiety, tension put on her that was put on me before. So I started to back off a lot with it. And now she's like, I got an 87. All right, keep working at it. Okay, perfect.
What do you expect from other people?
From other people? Mm-hmm. Like towards me?
Mm-hmm.
Or you talking about whenever like I set goals or
I guess both.
Yeah. So I try not to set expectations for other people. I try not to. I like for people to surprise me. Someone to surprise me and do something and say, oh, wow, that's great. I love to hear that. Expectations, I feel like there's some sort of like deadline or some sort of standard you got to meet. And for the most part, I mean, with me as an instructor, I guess the expectation would be to be a successful instructor. But here we even tell them at the course, it's like, just be you, go into a flight room, be you. And you will be successful in there as long as you take the tools that have been presented to you. But I look at, if I make up my mind I want to do something, that's a goal. If somebody tells me to do something, that's more of an expectation. And I'm more in the goal setting business than the expectation business, I guess.
Yeah, I've been curious about that. The reason why I asked you that is because I think for me recently, as I was looking at some of the relationships that I had within my life and just connections, professional, personal, whatever the category was, I'd found myself to be in an interesting space because there were times where I was setting expectations for other people.
Yeah.
So whether it was a form of frequency, staying in touch on a weekly, monthly, annual basis, or I had experienced the same thing from other people. And that's, I'll share with you a story. One of the more recent stories I had, individual had sent me a text, and she was expecting one form of feedback or some like congratulations type, like certain words that I had to say.
Right.
Well, I didn't end up saying them because I don't operate that way. I don't.
You did the thumb or something?
Yeah, I might have done something like that, or I think I said something like, "That's awesome, happy to hear that," but I guess I didn't congratulate her, and so she had responded by saying, "Everyone but you congratulated me on this success."
Ooh.
And it was an interesting situation to be in because I had realized that is an expectation that is solely set by her.
Mm-hmm.
And not everyone communicates the same exact way. Just like the same exact reasons, I don't know if you experience this or any of the listeners, but when someone sends you a text message, some people respond with one word, others will respond with a full-blown memoir, and then some people will just give you a thumbs up. But it doesn't diminish them compared to some of the others because that's just their form of communication.
Yeah.
And so for me, I just started to realize that it was more important to understand how each person communicates rather than compare and contrast them against each other. Man, Bodie doesn't do this, but he does that.
Mm-hmm.
So you're different people.
Yeah.
And I realized in that moment just the importance of understanding the relationships that I'm in and what is my role within them and what is that mode of communication. Those that choose to use 1 to 2 word, maybe a sentence, it doesn't make them any less than.
Yeah.
It's just different. So that was just the interesting one for me to be a part of and really talking about how do you deal with other people's expectations. And in some of those situations, I had to draw the line. I had to tell myself that if this is the relationship that we're going to be a part of, to me, it feels very transactional. There's nothing wrong with it. It's just that I'm at a different chapter of my life. And so I'm more so looking for a relationship that can really help transform me and that are not necessarily an active scorekeeper.
Yeah. You
did this, therefore I have to do that. Now, I'm also not going to say that I wasn't like that once upon a time. I was 110%. Where I did something for someone and then I expected for them to do the same thing back. And then I'll get mad at them if they didn't.
Yeah. But did you communicate it with them? Or was it almost like and I think that's the biggest thing is communication.
I communicate with myself internally.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I told myself what had to be done. I told myself, and I think that's a really good point that you just bring up in there. And that's the whole aspect of open communication.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, even in those situations, as I was sharing with you earlier, some of the people that are within my circle that say, you have to do this, you have to have that by this age, by this time, opening that loop and just saying, why do you believe that? And why do you think I have to do that? Yeah. So having that difficult conversation, But to me, it's a more honest approach because now I can really understand where you're coming from instead of creating that full-blown narrative in my head, which can lead to forms of frustration as well as anger.
Yeah. I think the communication, I think, is key with expectations, because you get like a new CEO of a company and he rallies everybody together, or you got a new leader, a new commander in the military, and they get everybody together in a base theater somewhere, and they're like, my expectation is this, and they'll communicate it with people. But a lot of times, even the way we changed our feedback in the military, it is met expectations, clearly exceeded expectations. But if you get a met expectations, that's like frowned upon. It's like, you said I met your expectations. That's not good. But it's all about communication, is what the whole thing is built around. But I think the part that's really interesting to me is, whether it's my friendships or, marriage or with kids or anything, is we'll get mad at people for not doing something, or, for doing something. But more times than not, we get mad at them for not doing something. And then when they talk to us about it, it's like, well, I expected you to do this. Like you said, like you expected that reply back. I don't want HBD. I want happy birthday typed out to me when you send me a reply. And it's just not communicating with each other.
Do you think
go ahead.
I was going to say, do you think a form of expectation is almost somehow tied to validation? Like validating that your way of living. I mean, otherwise, I'm just trying to think, why is it important for me to communicate to you what you need to be saying in a text message response?
I think texts are the worst. I think they are the worst at it, where it's like, well, I expected more. I had that happen not too long ago, where it was that's all the reply I got. Like that was it. But I was like, I didn't know there was an expectation. I didn't know there was a word. I was supposed to max out my words when I text you back. But yeah, I think it is a form of validation, honestly. I think it is, but it's not communicated.
Yeah. Yeah, I was just thinking about that the other day. I wonder if it's me seeing almost like a direct reflection of me in someone else. Yeah. And that's where I'm going back to, okay,
how I would reply.
This way. Exactly.
I wouldn't have replied that way. I would have handled that. I would have communicated that different. And that's our defense when we get angry about something like that, or when we get perturbed. It's like, all right, Oleg, I mean, I get it. You told me you would do it, but that's not how I would do it.
Yeah.
And we want it done that way.
What's the fine line then? Well, let me ask you this. Is that even a question that you choose to ask the other individual, as far as how would you like me to respond? Because then what's the fine line between preserving your own individual identity and who you are, and then also respecting how the other person wants to be treated?
Yeah, because it comes off petty at that point.
Right?
It really does. It's like, well, geez, okay. Then you don't get any text from them. You don't get nothing back from them at all. And you're like, what's their problem? But yeah, I just think it's we all want things done our own way. I think we're all just naturally programmed that way. But things like that I've learned just to kind of, it's water off my back. It's not that big of a deal. But some people, they will get upset about stuff like that, and they'll communicate it, and then it ends up leading to an argument or disagreement or misunderstanding. And like I said, text are the word. I just call somebody at that point.
Yeah. Yeah, that seems like the easier option. Just get on the phone and really hear their voice and just explain it that way. Because text, I don't know how you process this, but for me, like humor especially, it's so hard to communicate through a text.
Oh yeah.
I have a very different type of humor as well. So communicating that through a text message, I mean, it's nearly impossible.
Mm-hmm. I totally agree. Yeah, it's I guess I'm just more old school. I'd just rather talk to somebody than sit there doing this the whole time. But so they can understand the message. I'm gonna do a Scott Mason. I'm gonna flip this on you. What we're talking about expectations.
Yeah.
where did the expectation come from for the white picket fences, the 2-story house? And like I told you before we came on, I was like, you walk outside to grab your newspaper and Mr. Johnson's mowing the yard and Oleg's walking the dog down the street and the Thompson twins are rollerblading down. Like where did that become like the expectation of everyone, the white picket fences?
Well, I don't know if I can necessarily pinpoint the origin, but I think partially, at least the way that I understand it, that is a version of the American dream.
Yeah.
That's what it means to be able to live a successful life, to be able to provide for one's family. So I don't know where it came from, but I will say that it's still alive more than ever before. I know many people that have that dream, and I'm not saying by any means there is right or wrong way of doing it. Whatever you choose is the way that you choose, and that's the accepted way. But if that's the case, if whatever you choose is what the others respect or whatever it is or accept ultimately, then why is the other version of it not as acceptable? Why is the version where taking the time to, whether it's to reflect or to really learn about yourself? See, I've experienced this. I don't know if you can relate to this, but in going from one relationship, intimate relationship, to another, I've sometimes found myself taking time in between, not sometimes, but most times taking time in between, intentionally taking time in between to really learn who I was in that particular relationship and what am I seeking moving forward. I was not the person that just gets out of this one and jumps immediately into another one. I feel like, in a way, in my opinion, it's almost like a wasted effort because I haven't really reflected upon, well, what did I learn from the other one?
Exactly.
Especially if things ended on a rocky note, so to speak. I realized after a while that it's not always the other person's fault. There are some things that I could have done differently. There are some ways that I could have communicated differently.
Yeah.
But I didn't have those realizations until I took some time to reflect upon that. And I think that's one of the things that I personally find to be a challenge when other people's expectations around relationships or marriage or the white picket fence or the house, whatever it is, get placed on me because I'm in a different chapter.
Yeah.
You know, I'm genuinely trying to learn and understand who am I as an individual and what does it actually mean to have a companion. I mean, let's face it, after a while, companionship, at least for me, it transforms. It becomes a lot more than just the physical act of being in a relationship. You know, who can you really share a space with, have a conversation, even if it is agree to disagree one? But you can really see the other person's side and help expand your perspective. So I think there's a lot behind that. I would actually be curious to hear from you as far as what do you think is, what, in your opinion, what makes the right companion? What makes a companion for you?
Ooh. What makes the right companion? You know, for me, because I was in so many, it sounds so bad when I say it out loud. I was in so many relationships younger when I was in, you know, my teens and 20s and stuff. And I was under this expectation of, well, you got to be married by a certain year. I was like almost chasing like that invisible number of, we were talking about it before you came on the air, where you'll talk to your friends and it's like, bro, you're not getting any younger. You're 25. Why are you not married? Why do you not have kids? You should have 3 kids by now. So when I was getting into my early to mid 20s, I was like, oh my gosh, these people around me are getting married and they're in relationships, and I'm still, you know, bouncing back and forth from this relationship to this relationship. And I think what you said was valid. We get out of a relationship, especially at a young age, and we want that sense of you know, want and you know, acceptance. So what do? you jump right into a new relationship and you're not ready because you didn't do the self-reflecting. And we always end something, especially at a younger age, because it takes us a lot longer, I think, to really accept feedback, accept, like, okay, I could have done this better. That self-assessment piece, we always just think they were a nutcase. They were
the other person's fault.
Yeah. Oh, they were crazy. But in reality, we have a lot of things. I look at 21-year-old version of me, and I was like, that was a tough person to be around for quite a while. He's very needy, but yeah, like I was guilty of the same thing. I would get done with a relationship, I'd jump into another relationship, and I'm like, why didn't that one work out? But all this stuff was building up that I'm not reflecting on and not looking back on, and like, okay, Trip, maybe you're the problem with some of this stuff. But I think we get this expectation in relationships of you got to be with someone, you've got to get married, you've got to start raising a family, and it gets compared to other people. And I've had people tell me before, they're like, man, I'm getting old. I'm 28 years old. I'm ancient now. I'm never going to have kids and get married at this stage in my life. And it's like, don't rush that. People do it at 40 and 50, but there's that invisible age. There's that invisible, income, that invisible, you name it, house that we set, but I don't know where it ever really comes from. It's just comparison to other, and I don't think social media helps at all, because you look at everybody on social media and it's like, the perfect pictures and the perfect family. And I think that almost like speeds people up to where they rush into a relationship because they're like, oh my gosh, they're skipping rocks out at the pond and they're rolling in snow together. And it's just, they're so happy. Why am I not doing that?
Yeah.
But perfect companion. Yeah. That is something I think everyone would have to like, that would be more of a goal to figure out like what type of relationship you want to be in. I would actually take expectations out if it's going into a relationship and just say, let's see if it's organic, see if it works. My goal is to have a successful relationship with this person, a healthy relationship with this person, and not compare yourself to every other relationship you see and say, I have to do it this way. I have to be like this person. That would probably be my advice. I'm probably not the guru of love advice. that would be my 2 cents.
What does personal success for you look like in your relationship?
In my relationship, personal success, pushing each other to be better. I'm not the same person I was 13 years ago when I got married. I'm not. And I would feel like for me, I would have failed at personal success if I was still that working at Red Lobster. Not that there's anything wrong with Red Lobster, but that version of me. My goals have changed. My priorities have changed a lot in the past 13 years. So for me, it's continuously growing, having someone to be by you, pushing you as well. But then you push that person to strive to be better and to grow as well. So it's kind of like an iron sharpening iron type mentality.
Yeah, I've been curious about that. I think for me, what I've realized is similar to you. There's so many different phases that I can recall, the younger version of myself, and not necessarily to blame or shame or guilt, but more so just to acknowledge where I was. My version of success was very different when I was younger.
Yeah.
When I was just getting into the 20s, I mean, I can't say that part of that version of success wasn't built around making as much money as possible.
And you want it instantly.
Yeah. Instant gratification. Absolutely. Yeah. And I think within that, there is, if I didn't take the time to reflect after some of those relationships that I was a part of when I was younger, I can't say that I would be in this position having the conversation that I do, because I would have just gone from one to the other.
Yeah.
And after a while, I had a conversation like this with a friend of mine. We were talking about crisis and the importance of learning during a crisis as well as learning after it happens. He said the thing that makes a big difference, or why it's important to learn during it, is because if you think about it, an event happens, a challenge happens, and then however many hours or days later you reflect upon that. Well, the thing that I didn't take into account is that I'm no longer reflecting about that event alone. I'm also somewhat blinded by the thousands of other events that took place in between.
Mm.
So it's really difficult to understand how is it that took place and why is it that took place, because there were thousands of other events that happened after that crisis situation took place. And I think the same exact thing for me applies to some of these relationships or connections, even professional connections, managing one's network, managing the expectation from a network. That's a whole other ballgame to understand and really be a part of, because there are individuals who are solely there to do business. They don't want to know anything about you. They don't want to know who you really are. They just want to know, how can I help you? Give me 3 tangibles that I can add value to your life, and then I'll go to the next one. Once again, nothing wrong with that, just a different way of doing it. So when I come across individuals like that, I find it harder for me to really be in that connection because I don't operate through that lens.
Mm-hmm.
I'm more about developing a connection, hearing your voice, whether it is we have a 30 or an hour, however long conversation about something that is completely unrelated to anything business. That's the thing that's going to allow me to really understand you rather than specific milestones or agendas that I can help you with. So that's a very different ballgame as well. Managing professional expectations.
Yeah.
LinkedIn. I mean, think about the number of people that we actually connect with and come across, and think about how different each person's approach is from the one that's following that one.
Yep.
Like, completely different ballgame. And I can't say that I don't know how I understand that. I don't know how I understand how I navigate through it.
We because you and I both pretty similar. We're doing podcasts. Shadows podcast, available on over 10 platforms right now. But with us doing our podcasts and stuff, it's interesting because we do get connected with so many people, different people, every single one. And a lot of times this is really interesting. For example, you can say, Bodie, I got this connection for you. I want you to meet Brad Bradson. He's a good guy. He's this amazing guy. And you set this expectation for me to where I'm like, ooh, I'm ready to meet Brad Bradson. I'm excited to meet this guy. And, I'll listen to your episode with him and I'm like, oh, nice. Okay. Yeah, this is going to be a good fit. But then I interact with Brad Bradson. My interaction is completely different than yours. Yeah. He just doesn't like me. He's an Oleg guy. He's not a Bodie guy. And we don't click whatsoever. But that expectation was so high that you'll talk to me and I'm like, he was okay. We just didn't click. We're not going to be buddies or anything like that. And, maybe it didn't work out. But then it's like, because of your experience with them, sometimes we almost get offended.
Yeah.
If they don't see the same, if they don't meet that expectation that we had set for them. And people do that with movies. They do it with music. They do it with people, where it's, someone will hype up somebody or something so big.
Yeah.
And they set this this book, you've got to read this book. It's the best book you've ever seen in your life. And I read it and I'm like, expectation was a little too high. I didn't really care for it that much. But that happens a lot, I think, with the networking that we do with LinkedIn and stuff. I'm going to connect you to this person. They're fantastic. They're going to be one of the best people you ever met in your life. And then, it just doesn't pan out and it doesn't work out. And we had such high expectations, but it just didn't meet.
Yeah. I also think you bring up a really good point, actually, regarding podcasts and how that works with guests. I personally haven't heard this particular message or this point talked about probably ever, to be honest with you. And that's this concept of the people that we connect with as guests. They're not necessarily all lifelong friends.
Mm-mm.
I mean, let's be real about that. I think there's something about this concept that, and I've experienced this, in Overcoming Odds, we've had 234, 35 episodes, some number like that.
A little bit ahead of me.
Does that mean that I have 234 friends?
Yeah.
And that I can pick up the phone if times get tough and rely? Absolutely not.
Yeah.
10 max.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe even less than that. And I think that also goes to the expectation of not everyone you meet is going to be your best friend. Not everyone you meet is someone that you will be sharing space with beyond that initial conversation.
Mm-hmm. I've had people come on the show that I've scheduled them. I've looked up their bio. I have done my research, and this is without anybody connecting me to them. It's just I went out and sought out this person and got him as a guest, and I'm really excited. I don't know if you've had this as well. I'm not going to say which episodes, but they you get them on the. It was Oleg, but no, you get them on the show. Or even like the pre-discussions, like you get them on there and you start talking to them and you're really excited. You open the Zoom meeting or the StreamYard meeting and they log in and you start talking to them and it's just no chemistry, no connection. Like you said, we're not going to be friends after this. It's a one-off. And you get done recording. You didn't have a good flow during the conversation. It didn't feel natural. It felt rushed for whatever reason. I've had people log in and they're like, you've got 20 minutes starting 2 minutes ago. And when it's over with, I had such high expectations for this. Like I already created the cover art. I was that ready for it. Yeah. And then I get them on and it's like, I could have done without that. That wasn't the best and we set those expectations sometimes. I talk about we set goals, but we set expectations in our head as to how good somebody's going to be or how great someone's going to be. But yeah, I totally agree with you. There's been so many people that, I go into every one looking like, oh, this can be more than just one episode. I can possibly expand my network with this, but some unfortunately is just not.
It's just the way that they are.
Mm-hmm.
Billy Atwell has joined us here. He actually hosts a show of his own. I'd be curious to hear from you, Billy. How do you look at your guests in general and this concept of is everyone or is everyone not a lifelong friend, or are some of them truly one-time conversations and encounters? Because as you were sharing this, I think that's the same exact thing that I'm fascinated by is I think about all the episodes that I've done. Out of all of those, there's only a handful of people that I've stayed in touch with. And it doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with those that I didn't stay in touch with, because I think it's a two-way street. Yeah. I had to put in the effort just like you had to put in the effort in order for us to maintain the connection that we have. But I will also say that there is an outside expectation that forms of podcasts carry with it. I mean, think about the listeners, the number of listeners and downloads, and the expectation that creates of whether or not your show is successful or not.
That's a good one too, yeah.
And you get ranked. You literally get ranked based on an expectation. And that ranking determines your positioning. Therefore, it can determine your worth, your purpose, and your meaning in the world. So if you're not top 5 or you're not top 10, what are the chances that someone's going to listen to you?
The download thing's interesting. You bring that up because when I started, I've not been shy about it. When I got started, I've really used the Llama Lounge, which is another tremendous podcast. You've been on that one as well.
Yeah.
I was using that kind of as the measuring bar. I was using them as, how did y'all get set up? All right, sweet. They helped us get set up. And then it was, where are your downloads at? Oh, we're not quite there. Well, they had been doing it for a lot longer than us, but we wanted it like instantly. And it's like, we don't have the same amount of downloads and audience, but we've been patient and we've built up our audience to where now it's meeting our expectations that we initially set. But those first couple of months, I was like, and that's why a lot of podcasts ultimately fizzle out, because they put in the work, but they don't have the numbers, they don't have the downloads, they don't have the followers, on Instagram. Those dopamines are real. They really are. I posted an episode and it got, 14 views on my YouTube page or my, downloads or whatever. And it's like cutting bait. I'm done. That's a real thing as well. And that's why I think like statistically, a lot of podcasts don't make it past, like 8 episodes or something like that. Like 10 is like a magic number for most podcasts, but I guarantee you majority of those that have gone out there and fizzled, it's been because it stems back to expectations some way, shape, or form, whether it's downloads, followers, subscriptions, reviews, not comparing to such and such's number. Caleb and I have Ignite and Shadows, 2 completely separate shows, kind of under the same umbrella. We don't compare downloads. We don't compare likes or any of that stuff because we don't want to set those expectations on the other one. But yeah, it's pretty interesting you brought that up. And
think about the impact that it has on your mental health. Depression, anxiety, stress, just the unnecessary. I mean, for me, I can't say it's unnecessary for everyone because everyone has their own journey and everyone has their own expectations when it comes to it. I personally don't try to look at those things as far as how many people listen to this, how many people engaged. I do it so that I can engage with other people and help ask questions or bring up whatever the topic of conversation is. But I have found myself recently in those situations where it's like I actively choose not to look at the numbers because they do influence. Yeah. They influence the conversation I have moving forward. If one episode had 500 listens and the other one had 100 or 10, do you choose not to have a conversation around that topic ever again? Yeah. Or is it just wrong time and wrong place? Maybe I was in a different state. Maybe I wasn't feeling well. Maybe I was going through grief, loss, whatever it is. And so it prevented me from being fully there in the moment to the expectation that I set for myself. Yeah. And so the questions I was asking may not be the same exact way. The way that I was engaging with the guests, I think there's so many factors that contribute to what it means to have a quote unquote successful conversation that I don't even fully understand. Yeah. And then each podcast gets built on the other. So you have one episode that you thought was just through the roof, and then the next one doesn't meet that expectation. So then how do you view the whole show? Yeah, and it's like, what are you really comparing it to? Because I know exactly what you're talking about. I recorded one not too long ago, and I logged off, and I was like, "All right, see you later," and I hit end, and I was like, oh, I was so off. Yeah, that was not good. And I emailed the person, and they were like, "Oh my gosh, this was an amazing conversation," and blah blah blah. And for me, I'm like, I didn't think it was that good. But like, what am I measuring that to? My vibe. My energy, but we do that a lot. Like the perfectionist out there, those individuals who are those perfectionist tendencies, they go out and they do something and they're so despondent by it. And other people look at it and they're like, man, you killed it today. You did great. And you see this all the time with people and they're like, no, that was terrible. That was awful. They've set these expectations for themselves. Like I said, this invisible bar, this invisible number, this invisible rubric or whatever it is in their head. And they don't need you to tell them they did good or bad. They're already kicking themselves for it. And I've been so guilty of that on here. I've been guilty of as an instructor. I'll leave a flight room sometimes and I'll be like, I'm not happy with my performance in there. But you run into a student and they'll say, oh, I learned so much from that lesson. Or you'll read a review at the end of the course and they're like, that was my favorite block we had with you was when you did such and such. And yeah, we have these internal expectations as well. And it's a good point. I'm curious, when you correspond with a guest in this situation, do you tell them the truth? That I didn't like that. Or do you take the blame? Do you take the blame even if it is on the other person's end? Technical difficulties, whatever. I
I'm trying to think of which one if I've had. We haven't had 200 and some episodes. We're on like 30 right now, but I'm trying to think of like the one I had that was just okay. So I did have one that was technical difficulties on the user's end, and like they couldn't get logged in. There was technical difficulties. They had spotty Wi-Fi the whole time. Like anything that could have gone wrong went wrong with it. And they were very like apologetic. I was doing the oh, no worries. No, don't worry about it. I wasn't upset by it. We just rescheduled and did it again. But if something happens on my end, yeah, absolutely. I'll totally take blame for that and own up to it. But yeah, that's I'll own up. If it's a bad episode, I'll tell someone. I'll be like, we're gonna have to do a little bit of editing on that one. But yeah, that's kind of so for those of you out there, if you come on the show and I tell you have to have a lot of editing,
you know what that means.
My hand. Yeah, so much editing into that one, but yeah. So there's my secret.
I've been curious about that because I'm actively stepping into that phase more, and it's just really acknowledging the truth of the situation. For example, if you have a recording or a podcast such as the one that we're doing, and it starts at a particular time, and let's say the person is late or I'm late, and I don't communicate, or the person doesn't communicate with me.
Yeah, I've had that.
And then we'll get on and then we don't acknowledge it. And like either I will say, oh, no problem. But the reality of the matter is it's a big problem.
Oh, I tell them that.
Because now we gotta reschedule. Now we gotta do all this. And I mean this from both sides. Because I find myself in situations like that as well, where I might be late and due to whatever circumstances, I don't communicate for why it is that I'm late. And then the host will say, oh, no big deal. But internally, it's probably a huge deal.
Yeah.
And so at what point do you choose to express the truth of the situation and acknowledging that might impact the conversation you have forward, that might impact your own set of expectations around that episode.
Yeah.
But the reality of the matter is that is the truth. That's what we went through. If this episode you came, 20 minutes late and didn't communicate with me saying, hey, this is why I'm being late, or technical problems or whatever. And then I tell you, hey, it's no big deal, when the reality of the matter, it's a big deal.
Yeah. You try to tiptoe around it. That's like coming into work, just throwing your apron on and hopping on the grill. Like you need to, it's weird you bring this up because I'm very much a by the book. I tell you I'm going to be somewhere at 10 o'clock. I'm going to be there at like 9:30.
Yeah.
I was on here. I was like an hour early today. But I'm very, I hold myself to that standard or that expectation. And so this past Monday, and I hate to be that guy who's, talking about an accolade or something, but we had a morning meeting together with our cadre, and I have people outside of my office talking right now. If you hear that,
that's all good.
But yeah, they're fans of the show. But so we had this morning meeting. Any and everything that could have gone wrong went wrong. Like I left I took my uniform home, but I left my boots at work. I was running late. I had some stuff going on at the house, and so I get up here. We're supposed to be here at like 10:30. And I call and I'm like, I sent a group message. I said, hey, I'm running a little late. And I felt so bad because I'm like, that's not like me to do that. Never do that. Well, the one day I do it, I come in and like all of leadership was in here and they were surprising me with an award. And so I come in and I like walk through everybody with my uniform in my hand and my gym clothes on. And I'm like, excuse me, come in here, change, come outside. And they present this, but everyone had been waiting on me. And I was surprised because I walked out of my office and it was, surprise, you're the award winner for blah, blah, blah. And they give it to me, take photos and everything. But instantly in my head, I'm like, they've got to be disappointed.
Yeah.
My commandant has to be disappointed because I was late. I had, a reason for being late, but still I had to explain that reason to him. The people who don't know me there that showed up, because it was like 15 people there, they're probably thinking that this guy, he's the one y'all are giving this to, the guy that comes in and left his boots in his office. And yeah, but I was thinking, wow, I didn't meet their expectation. My commandant expects better of me. My cadre that I work with expect better than me than this. And I was really hard on myself after that. And I did feel the need to go to him and say, it's weird how we do it too. We'll like be in the bathroom washing our hands or something. We're like, oh, crazy day. Oh, everything that went wrong. Start explaining it to them. They don't even ask, but you just start giving it. You feel like you owe them that at that point. And we'll do it, and we'll have people, and we know how it feels on the opposite end. Someone will come up to us and they start explaining it, and you're like, okay, I don't need to hear it. I got it. You're fine. But yeah, that happened to me this week. I felt like I did not meet someone's expectation, and especially the people who don't know me, I felt like I really like diminished anything that they thought about me whatsoever.
How often do you challenge that internal narrative, that story?
A lot. I'm very much an internal perfectionist, and I mean, I can put this desk here together, and if I have something off, I feel like I did not meet the expectation that I was supposed. If I didn't get a screw in right or something, but I'm constantly battling mine. But I think that pushes me in a way, the little internal expectation, I guess. Yeah, it drives me.
Yeah, I just get curious about it because for me, when situations like that come up and then I form a full-blown narrative, man, this person must think this of me, now I'm this. And I find, especially now, I didn't used to do this for many years of my life, but now I will actually confront the narrative. So if I'm experiencing that story, as you were describing, I would actually go to the individual and ask questions in order to validate that story in my head and really get to the core. Like, well, what did you think? Do you think of me any less than, or things like that? And I find that if the truth, which most times it is different, most times the truth of what they think and whether or not they even care is very different compared to the New York Times bestseller I'm writing in my head. And so,
everyone's out of history.
Yeah, like there's this full-blown story that happens around a situation.
Yeah.
In your case, it's like you're a minute late or 5 minutes late. You recognize that, but they may not, because they might have been a part of a conversation for that 5 minutes that they really enjoyed and that wish that conversation actually lasted longer than having to start the meeting.
Mm-hmm. Expectations, both internal and external from other people, are powerful but dangerous. Okay. And I think they can be, for ourselves especially, it can be powerful because it can be a driving force. But I think it can be dangerous too, because like you said, you get that screenplay written in your head to where you are like, oh my. The other day I was like, oh my gosh, the commander's here, the first sergeant's here.
Yeah,
he's the one giving it to me. Oh my gosh, I'm done. I'm done as an instructor. And because I'm 5 minutes late and I left my boots here. But you talk to someone and it's like, it's no big deal, man. It is no big deal. We were showing off new flight rooms. We were showing off the new amenities around the building. You were we wouldn't have started another 15 minutes anyways. So yeah, powerful but dangerous.
The worst for me was when I was in similar situations and where I had received an award, whether it was from a teacher, principal, or whoever, is that when I see people of such authority in the same room, and let's say that I am late to that meeting, or I did something, like I messed up some way, some shape or some form before, and you don't think of it as the best case scenario. You think of it, man, I did something wrong. I have all these people in this room now who are probably going to give me feedback in X, Y, and Z form. Yep. And yet it turns out to be something completely different. Once again, going back to expectation. I think there's also an expectation that goes around authority. in thinking that the individual is going to treat you in X, Y, and Z way, give you X, Y, and Z feedback, when the reality of the matter is they're still people and they might act differently compared to the way that you expect them to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I noticed it as an instructor when I was teaching in Germany. We had to do graduation, and we had all of leadership. Everybody around the base was usually in attendance, like 300 and some people. And I would get up there and I would do my, little 20-minute spiel, and I may fumble over a word or say something, and I really hang on what I said because I'm like, oh, that came off bad to my commandant. It came off bad to my leadership. And you bring it up to them and they don't even notice. So I didn't even catch that until you told me. And we feel so bad about it. But more times than not, people don't even really pick up on that stuff. But like I said, internally, it can be we're dangerous to ourselves in a way with our thoughts.
Yeah. Bodhi, what are some of the ways that people can connect with you? I'll show the website here at the bottom for those that are watching, but tell us a little bit more about the podcast that you have, as well as anything else that you have coming up.
Absolutely. The podcast, which I've got, I can't even remember anything right. Yeah, the Shadows podcast.
That's the best self-promotion I've ever seen in my life.
We were talking before. I was like, I got a styrofoam cup today. But no, we're on Instagram at @the_Shadows podcast. As you can see, the link, you go to that link tree right there. It'll take you to everything that we're doing. But our podcast, basically, Oleg's been on there. Casey's actually coming up on a future episode.
Mm-hmm.
I heard you talk about him. Scott Mason was on a recent one. But we have any and everybody, pretty much every single person, whether they're military, whether they're an athlete, a CEO, an author, they all have a story to tell. Each and every person, each listener on here has a story to tell.
Yeah.
And we give them that platform, and they come on and we have fun at first. We get some rapid fire questions to kind of loosen them up. And then we go through their story from their upbringings to really the obstacles that they've had to overcome. And we've had breast cancer survivors, PTSD survivors. We've had people who have just been in such traumatic experiences and they've overcome. And, kind of the concept of the show is everybody has a shadow. That shadow sticks by your side from cradle to grave. And, your darkest moments, you feel like you're alone, but your shadow is still there. And your highest moments at that pinnacle, you are succeeding and the light shining on you, and that shadow is larger than life. But it always somewhat diminishes in a way as well. But it always stays with you, and it's always a constant reminder of things you've been through. And it's an awesome experience that I've been at. We're about our halfway 6-month mark. You've had 200 and some episodes. I think we just dropped episode 27. But every Monday we have a new one. Such a diverse group of guests that we have on there as well. And then Caleb Pearson, the guy who does the Ignite podcast, which is you can't have the shadows without the light. His is a personal professional development one on Thursdays. But we also, on this link, if you go to our YouTube page, we have all of our archived Shadows episodes. And then every Friday, Caleb and I release an off the air episode where we just get on there, have fun for 20 minutes. We talk about our past episodes for the week and our upcoming episodes for the next week. And it's good. So if anybody out there has a story to tell, if they would like to, get their story out there, because our goal is to reach one guest every episode. That is our expectation, is one guest every episode that, hears it and they're like, wow, I needed this at this point in time in my life. Just like finding that right book at the right time, on that right episode. And it really resonates with you. And crazy thing is, me as a host, I've had so many guests recently that things that have been going on I still have a life, and things that have been going on in my life, it's like, oh my gosh, this was the perfect guest for me to interview because their message resonates with me. And then vice versa. There'll be some guests that I've had that are like, wow, they'll message me after and they're like, I needed this experience to go on this, because we go deep. We open up some wounds. We we peel that scab back, and we really, we're vulnerable on there and sharing some story. We got some really, really, really good ones coming up. Really, Dylan Roberts, I'm telling you, that's going to be one in about 3 to 4 weeks. Sleeper episode. We got some really, really, really good people coming up pretty soon. So check us out, give us feedback, and let us know what you think.
How much do you think a conversation like that starts with your own genuine interest in wanting to learn about your own experience as well as the experience of the other individual?
I think, honestly, I found that the pre-conversation, so I'll talk to them beforehand.
Yeah.
And I can feel the chemistry with some people, and some it's just like, not really there. But I've had people come on before, and they come on thinking one thing, and then by the time we're done talking, they're telling me their story on a pre-conversation, and they've really opened up to me. So, I'm not going to sit here and say that I'm, the funniest, the smartest, any of that. I'm genuine. I'm genuine, and I get that honest from my mom. I'm just a genuine person, and I'll sit there and listen to stories, but I'm also vulnerable myself, and I'll tell people the stuff that I've been through, which I've shared with you before, with the loss of my father and my sister, and it's just real talk. And I think we both have the same objective in mind. Each message can help somebody else who may desperately be in need of hearing that at the right time.
Yeah, and you just never know whose message that's going to be. You never know who's listening. You never know when it's going to impact them. They might be listening to that episode 10 years down the road, and that's when it has the impact. It's just, there's so much that's unknown about it that it's once again, double-edged sword, powerful, but I guess you could also say dangerous, because you don't know. You don't know. And someone might listen to that conversation now, and something might stick to them, but they might listen to that same exact conversation 5 or 10 years down the road, and they pick up a completely different message.
I got something that someone said yesterday that I'll kind of steal with. You plant the seed, you walk away, but you'll never sit in the shade. You'll never know who it's impacted. You never know who it's going to, trickle down to. But just knowing that we've released, almost 30 episodes, and one episode has at least helped one person at this point. Mission accomplished.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you for being a part of this. Thank you for sharing everything. And anyone that's listening right now, feel free to connect with Bodie on LinkedIn, Facebook.
LinkedIn, right here. That's my LinkedIn name as well. I got to get used to where my hands are with this. I'm not very good at it.
No, thank you. Thanks for being a part of this and just
always
having this conversation.
Appreciate you having me. Always.